The party invitation arrived one afternoon just as I got home from work. The envelope was thick and stiff, glossy cream in color, with the sender's name neatly printed on it. I knew immediately who had sent it, even before reading the name in the top right corner. My sister Rena had always liked things like this, luxurious, polished, and expensive looking. My hand hesitated before opening the envelope. An uneasy feeling surfaced for no clear reason, like a vague intuition that was hard to explain. When I opened it, I found a birthday invitation for Rena's child. A large party, complete with the address of her grand house and a long list of activities. There was a dress code, a small note about the party theme, and a closing line that sounded friendly but felt distant. I read it calmly, then placed the invitation on the table. I took a slow breath. It had been a long time since I kept my distance from family events hosted by Rena, not out of resentment, but because there was always an awkward feeling that never truly went away. I live a simple life. My job is enough to cover daily needs, pay for my child's school, and save little by little. I have never felt that my life was lacking. But in Rena's eyes, simplicity was often seen as failure. Since long ago, she had measured people by what could be seen. Houses, clothes, cars, and social circles. I chose a different path, and that difference often made our relationship feel strained. My daughter, Alia, came out of her room with her hair still half wet. She had just finished bathing and walked toward me with a bright expression. Her eyes immediately fell on the envelope on the table. She picked it up carefully and read the front in a soft voice. Her smile slowly widened. "This is our cousin's party, right, Mom?" she asked, looking at me with hope. I nodded gently. Alia had always liked events like that. Not because of the luxury, but because she enjoyed meeting people, especially family. For her, a party was a place to play and laugh. There were no thoughts about status or appearance. A child's world is far more honest. "We're going, right?" she asked again. The question was simple, but the answer was not easy for me. I looked at her innocent face, her bright eyes, and her excited expression. I knew that if I refused, she would be disappointed, even if she would not complain. Alia was not a demanding child. She was used to accepting things as they were. "We'll see," I replied carefully. From that moment on, my mind could not let go of the invitation. I tried to recall past experiences. The quiet, judging looks. The comments wrapped in jokes that still left discomfort behind. I did not want Alia to feel the same way. I wanted her to grow up with confidence, not with the feeling that she was always less than others. That night, after Alia had fallen asleep, I picked up the invitation again. I reread the event details once more. The party would be held on the weekend, which meant I did not need to ask for time off work. Technically, there was no strong reason to refuse. What remained was a lingering worry that would not leave me alone. I sat on the edge of Alia's bed and looked at her peaceful sleeping face. She was hugging her favorite doll, breathing steadily, free of any burden. I realized that my decision was not only about attending a party. It was about whether I would keep avoiding things or start facing the reality that the world is not always kind, yet my child still has to learn how to stand within it. The next morning, Alia brought up the party again. She spoke excitedly about what she might do there. Playing with her cousins, seeing the decorations, and maybe tasting the birthday cake. I listened while preparing breakfast. Every word sounded sincere and full of joy. That was when I made my decision. I did not want my fear to become an obstacle to my child's happiness. If I kept avoiding situations like this, I would be teaching her to fear other people's judgments. That was not a lesson I wanted to pass on. "We'll go," I finally said. Alia smiled widely and hugged me tightly. The hug was warm and full of trust. I returned it while gently rubbing her back. In my heart, I promised that I would protect her as best as I could, no matter what happened later. I knew the party would not be easy. I knew there was a chance we would feel out of place. But I also knew that I was not alone. I was going as a mother, bringing the child I loved with all my heart. And for that moment, that was more than enough. The invitation no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a door leading to a test I had to face. I did not yet know what awaited us at that party. What I knew was that this step was the first one. And I was ready to take it, for Alia. That morning, Alia and I left earlier than usual. The day was still quiet, and the air felt cool and fresh. We headed to a small clothing shop that I often passed on my way home from work. The store was not large and was easy to miss if you did not pay close attention. Its display window was simple, without expensive mannequins or bright lights. Still, I knew that inside, there were often clothes that were neat and suitable. Alia walked beside me while holding my hand. She looked excited, even though she did not talk much. I could guess what was on her mind. She knew we were going to look for clothes for the party. For her, this was important, even if she never said it directly. When we stepped inside, a small bell above the door rang softly. The shop owner greeted us with a warm smile. She already knew me because I shopped there quite often. I went straight to the children's section. There were not many choices, but everything was neatly arranged. I checked each item carefully, paying attention to the fabric and the stitching. Alia stood close to me. She touched a few dresses gently, as if she were afraid of damaging them. Her eyes stopped on a light blue dress. The design was simple, with no excessive decoration. There were no sequins and no flashy lace. Still, it looked clean and comfortable. "This one is nice, Mom," she said softly. I picked up the dress and looked at it more closely. The fabric was soft, and the length was right for a child her age. It did not look like an extravagant party dress, but it also did not look like everyday clothing. I imagined Alia wearing it, walking among people with confidence. "Do you want to try it on?" I asked. Alia nodded quickly. She went into the small fitting room in the corner of the shop. I waited outside, browsing the other racks, though my thoughts stayed with her. Not long after, she came out with a slightly shy expression, but her eyes were shining. The dress fit her well. It was neither too big nor too small. She stood in front of the mirror and slowly turned around. A small smile appeared on her face, not a proud smile, but a satisfied one. "I like it," she said. I smiled back at her. Inside, I felt relieved. I knew that some people might compare this dress to the expensive outfits at the party later. But for me, what mattered most was that Alia felt comfortable and happy. I paid at the counter without much conversation. The price was affordable and within my means. When we left the shop, Alia hugged the shopping bag as if it held something precious. On the way home, Alia kept talking about the party. She asked if she could tie her hair later, or whether her black shoes were still suitable to wear. I answered each question patiently. I wanted her to feel involved, not just brought along. When we arrived home, Alia tried on the dress once more. This time, she paired it with the simple shoes she already owned. She stood in front of the mirror in her room, then looked at me with hesitation. "It's not too simple, is it, Mom?" she asked. The question made me pause for a moment. I did not want her to start judging herself through other people's eyes. I walked closer and knelt down so we were at the same level. "You look neat and kind," I answered honestly. "That's what matters." Alia nodded, though I knew she still held a small worry inside. Still, she did not ask anything else. She carefully hung the dress in the closet and closed the door gently. That night, before going to sleep, Alia sat beside me. She talked about school, about her friends, and about the upcoming party. I listened and nodded from time to time. When she started to feel sleepy, I covered her with a blanket and turned off the light. I sat for a while next to her bed after she fell asleep. My thoughts returned to the blue dress. A simple item, yet full of meaning. I realized that what I gave her might not compare to what others had. But I gave it with sincere effort and good intentions. I know the world is not always fair. I know there are people who judge by appearances. But I also know that my child does not need to become someone else to be worthy of respect. My role is to make sure she grows up feeling safe and confident. That dress may not attract anyone's attention at the party later, but for Alia, it is a dress chosen with hope and love. And for me, that is enough to make our next steps feel more certain. The day of the party finally arrived. Since morning, Alia had woken up earlier than usual. She looked excited, but I could see a slight tension on her face. She did not talk much and simply followed what I asked her to do. After breakfast, she took a shower and got ready neatly. I helped her put on the blue dress we had bought a few days earlier. I combed her hair simply and tied it back. There were no excessive accessories. I wanted everything to feel comfortable for her. We left around midday. I wore clean and modest clothes, simple but appropriate. On the way, Alia sat quietly beside me. From time to time, she looked out the window, then turned her gaze toward me. I held her hand, trying to give her a sense of security. She squeezed my hand back, even though she did not say anything. When our car entered Rena's neighborhood, the atmosphere immediately felt different. The streets were wide, and large houses stood neatly behind tall gates. Several expensive cars were parked along the road. Alia looked around with wide eyes. I knew this kind of view was not something she was used to. The car stopped in front of Rena's house. The house looked bigger than the last time I had seen it. The gate was wide open, and several well-dressed people were coming in and out. Music could be heard from inside, loud enough to signal that the party had already started. I took a deep breath before getting out of the car. As soon as we stepped into the yard, Alia held my hand more tightly. The yard was filled with decorations. Bright balloons, long tables with clean tablecloths, and neatly arranged ornaments. Several children were running around laughing. They were wearing clothes that looked expensive and eye-catching. I felt the glances of several adults standing in small groups. The looks were brief, but clear enough to make me aware that we were being noticed. I did not lower my head, but I also did not return them with an exaggerated smile. I simply walked straight ahead, focused on Alia. When we entered the inside of the house, the atmosphere became even busier. The large room was filled with guests. A big chandelier shone brightly, reflecting light from every corner. The food table was filled with dishes that looked luxurious. Alia walked slowly, as if she were afraid of taking a wrong step. I introduced myself to a few relatives I recognized. They greeted me politely, though some of them looked awkward. Some offered a brief smile, while others only nodded. I did not dwell on it. What mattered was that Alia stayed close to me. Alia watched the other children from a distance. She did not join them right away. She stood beside me, observing carefully. I could feel her confusion. She wanted to play, but she also felt out of place. I leaned down slightly and whispered that she could join if she wanted to. She nodded softly and took a few steps away from me. She approached a group of children who were laughing together. However, her steps slowed when she noticed their clothes. Dresses with large bows, shiny shoes, and carefully styled hair. Alia lowered her head for a moment, then returned to stand beside me. "It's okay, Mom," she said quietly. I gently rubbed her shoulder. I did not want to push her. I understood that feeling well. A sense of uncertainty that comes not from fear, but from feeling different. I wanted her to learn to accept that difference without feeling inferior. A few minutes later, Rena appeared from inside the house. She was wearing a striking dress and sparkling jewelry. Her smile was wide, but it did not feel warm. She approached us while glancing at Alia from head to toe. "So, you came after all," she said. I nodded and greeted her briefly. Alia stood beside me with a small smile. Rena returned the smile quickly, then turned to greet other guests. She walked away without saying much. After that, the atmosphere felt even more uncomfortable. I could sense Alia growing quieter. She no longer looked around. Her eyes were more often fixed on the floor. I wanted to take her outside for a moment, but I had not found the right time. I realized that the luxury around us was not just decoration. There was a distance created without words. A distance that made people feel that simply being present was not enough. I tried to stay calm, even though there was uneasiness in my heart. I led Alia to sit on one of the empty chairs. She followed. She sat with her hands folded on her lap. I saw her face trying to keep a smile, even though she was clearly holding back her feelings. I knew this party was starting to feel heavy for her. I took a sip of the drink that was provided, trying to distract my thoughts. But my eyes remained on Alia. I came to this party for her, and I began to question whether my decision had been the right one. In the middle of all the luxury and noise, I hoped for one thing only. I hoped that Alia would not feel alone. Reena appeared again not long after we sat down. This time, she was accompanied by a woman I did not know. They laughed softly, then stopped right in front of us. Reena introduced me briefly, without clearly stating our family relationship. Her tone was flat, as if I were just an ordinary guest who happened to be there. Alia has grown up, she said while looking my daughter up and down. Her smile looked polished, but her eyes were cold. Alia returned the smile politely, then lowered her head slightly. I could feel her body tense beside me. Yes, I replied shortly. Reena did not continue the conversation. She only gave a small nod, then turned back to her friend. They talked about their children's schools, extra lessons, and plans for vacations abroad. The topics flowed easily between them, without including us. I did not interrupt. I knew this was not a conversation that expected my presence. Alia sat quietly. Her hands were clasped together on her lap. From time to time, she lifted her head, then lowered it again. I could see her effort to stay calm. I wanted to ask her to stand up and walk outside with me, but Reena was still standing too close. A few other guests joined in. A small circle formed. Alia and I stood at the edge of it, like spectators who had been unintentionally pulled in. Reena laughed louder than before. She looked like she was enjoying the attention she was receiving. Every movement was measured, and every word sounded confident. I really wanted the party to feel different, Reena said while glancing around. Children these days need to get used to the right kind of environment. The words sounded casual, but the meaning was clear. I felt Alia move a little closer to me. I placed my hand on her shoulder, letting her know I was there. One of the guests looked at Alia briefly, then asked Reena with curiosity, "Whose child is this?" Reena looked at Alia, then at me. A small smile appeared on her face. "Oh, she's my niece," she answered. There was no pride in her voice, no warmth. Just a short statement. "Cute," the guest said, then returned to the conversation. I swallowed the discomfort that began to rise. I was not angry. I was simply tired. This situation felt like a repeat of many past gatherings. There was always a deliberate distance, as if simplicity was something that needed to be kept at arm's length. Reena then bent slightly toward Alia. "Why aren't you playing with the other kids?" she asked. Her voice sounded friendly, but her eyes carried judgment. Alia shook her head gently. "Not yet," she answered softly. "Well, they're playing over there," Reena said, pointing toward the garden. "But be careful. Don't get your dress dirty." Alia nodded. She stood up slowly, then looked at me for a moment, as if asking for permission. I nodded back and gave her a small smile. She walked away with careful steps. I watched her back until she stopped at the edge of the garden. She stood there for a while, watching the other children running and laughing. No one greeted her right away. She did not move closer, only stood and waited. Reena straightened up again and continued her conversation. She no longer paid attention to Alia. I stayed where I was, even though my urge to go after my daughter grew stronger. I held myself back. I wanted to give Alia space, even though I was ready if she needed me. A few minutes passed. I saw Alia try to approach one of the children. They spoke briefly, then the child walked away. Alia stood alone again. She did not cry, she was simply silent. I took a deep breath. The uneasy feeling became clearer. I felt like I had placed her in an unwelcoming space. But before I moved, Rena turned toward me again. You look tired, she said. Just sit. Enjoy the party. I looked at her. Her smile was still the same, neat and controlled. I knew that for her, everything was going according to plan. I did not respond. I only gave a small nod. Inside, I began to regret my decision. Not because I was afraid of Rena, but because I did not want Alia to learn that she had to adjust herself to how others saw her. I wanted her to know that she was valuable without conditions. I turned my gaze back toward the garden. Alia was still there. This time, she was sitting on a small bench, looking at the ground beneath her feet. Her shoulders were slightly slumped. I knew it was not physical tiredness. It was the slow rise of feeling unwanted. I stood up. I no longer cared about the conversation or the looks from others. I walked toward Alia. Whatever would happen after this, one thing was clear to me. I would not let her face it all alone. I was almost at the garden when Rena's voice suddenly sounded louder than before. Her tone changed. It was no longer mixed with laughter, but clear and deliberately raised. Several guests turned toward her. I stopped walking, sensing that something was wrong. Rena was standing near the food table, holding a glass. She smiled while looking at the children who were gathered there, then her eyes stopped on Alia. The glance was brief, but sharp enough. She then looked in my direction, as if making sure I could hear her. Cheap children shouldn't come to this party, she said with a small laugh. The sentence sounded light, like a joke. But the atmosphere shifted immediately. Some guests fell silent. A few forced stiff smiles, while others pretended to be busy with their phones or the food in their hands. No one spoke up. No one defended us. I felt my chest tighten. Those words hit like a direct blow. I turned toward Alia. She was standing not far from Rena. Her body froze. Her eyes widened, then slowly filled with tears. She looked at Rena, then around her. Her face flushed, not with anger, but with shame. A few other children laughed softly. Some of them echoed the adults' laughter without understanding its meaning. Alia lowered her head. Her shoulders trembled. She said nothing. She simply turned around and ran. I called her name, but my voice was swallowed by the music and the chatter. Alia ran past the guests, past the tables, then disappeared down the side hallway of the house. Her blue dress fluttered for a moment before vanishing from sight. I ran after her. My legs felt heavy, but I forced myself to move quickly. Behind me I heard people whispering. No one stopped Rena. She was still smiling, as if nothing had happened. I found Alia in the narrow hallway beside the house. She was crouched near the wall, hugging her knees. Her crying was restrained, but clear. She was trying to stay quiet, as if she did not want to be heard. My chest tightened at the sight of her like that. I knelt in front of her and wrapped her in my arms. Her body was cold and tense. Her sobs broke free the moment I touched her. She buried her face in my shoulder. Did I do something wrong, Mom? She asked through her tears. I shouldn't have come, right? Those words hurt more than anything Rena has said. I shook my head firmly, even though she could not see it. I stroked her hair gently, trying to calm her. You did nothing wrong, I said firmly. There is nothing wrong with you. She kept crying. Her breathing was uneven. I let her cry for a while. I knew there were no words that could erase that feeling instantly. I just needed to be there. Inside the house, the party continued. The music kept playing. Laughter could be heard again, though not as loud as before. It was as if what had just happened was only a small disturbance that had already passed. That realization made the situation feel even more unfair. I picked Alia up and carried her farther away from the crowd. We sat on a small bench near the back door. She wiped her tears with her sleeve. Her face was still wet, her eyes red. I don't like it here, she said softly. I know, I replied. We can go home if you want. She nodded without hesitation. There was no desire left to stay. I did not blame her. I no longer wanted to be there either. But before we left, I knew I had to go back inside for a moment, not to argue, not to respond with harsh words. I wanted Alia to see that I was not running away. I wanted her to know that dignity does not need to come with shouting. I left Alia on the bench for a moment, promising I would be right back. I walked into the house with calm steps. The music was still playing. Rena was standing with several guests, laughing as usual. I approached her. She turned and gave a thin smile. "Oh, where's your child?" she asked casually. I looked at her directly. "You know what you just said," I replied quietly. Rena shrugged. "Oh, it was just a joke." "Don't be so sensitive." I did not raise my voice. I did not show my anger. "A joke doesn't make a child cry," I said simply. Some of the guests began to pay attention. The atmosphere grew quiet again. Rena looked slightly disturbed, but she tried to maintain her composure. I did not wait for her response. I turned around and walked out. I did not want Alia to wait any longer. I did not want her to think she had to carry that shame alone. When I returned, Alia stood up and immediately hugged me. I picked her up without hesitation. We walked out of that house without looking back. In the car, Alia rested her head on my shoulder. Her crying had stopped, but her breathing was still heavy. I gently rubbed her back. "I'm sorry," I said. "I should have realized sooner." She shook her head. "It's okay, Mom." That answer made me even more certain. What happened that day would leave a mark. But I promised myself that the wound would not be allowed to grow into a sense of inferiority. I would make sure Alia knew one thing: no one has the right to belittle her. Not now, and not ever. The car moved slowly as we left Rena's house behind. I did not turn on the radio. I wanted to keep the atmosphere calm. Alia sat quietly in the seat beside me. She hugged her small bag and looked out the window. The streetlights reflected in her eyes, which were still red. She was no longer crying, but I knew her feelings had not fully settled. I glanced at her from time to time, making sure she was all right. My hands stayed firmly on the steering wheel. In my head, many things were spinning at once. There was anger, disappointment, and guilt. I held all of it back. I did not want my emotions to become another burden for her. The drive home felt longer than usual. Finally, Alia took a deep breath and broke the silence. "Mom," she said softly. "Yes," I replied at once. "Did I really look bad back there?" she asked without turning toward me. The question made my chest tighten again. I took a breath to keep my voice steady. "No," I said firmly. "You looked neat and kind. You did nothing wrong." She fell silent for a moment. I let her be. I knew she was trying to absorb my words. When we arrived home, I parked the car and turned off the engine. Alia got out slowly. Her steps were still careful, as if she was holding back feelings that had not fully faded. I opened the door and let her go in first. Inside, silence greeted us. The simple house felt warm and safe. Alia sat down on the sofa and took off her shoes. I put down my bag and jacket, then sat beside her. I did not speak right away. I wanted her to know she was not alone. A few minutes passed. Alia looked down, then suddenly said, "I feel embarrassed, Mom." I turned to her. "Embarrassed about what?" "Because everyone saw," she replied quietly. "They heard it." I moved closer to her. "They saw because an adult said something inappropriate," I said. "Not because of you." She lifted her head and looked at me. Her eyes were full of questions. "Why did Aunt Rena say that?" I paused for a moment. I had to choose my words carefully. I did not want to plant hatred, but I also did not want to lie. "Sometimes people say hurtful things because they forget how to be kind," I answered. "It's not because you are lacking." Alia nodded slowly. She rested her head on my shoulder. I wrapped my arms around her. Her body was still a little tense, but gradually it began to relax. We sat like that for quite a while. I stroked her back in slow, steady motions. I wanted her to feel safe. I wanted her to know that this house was a place where she did not need to prove anything. After some time, I took her to her bedroom. I helped her change her clothes. I folded the blue dress neatly and put it away in the closet. I did not want her to remember it with sadness. To me, that dress was still a symbol of good intentions, not humiliation. Aya sat on the bed, hugging a pillow. "Mom," she said again, "if I wore nicer clothes, they wouldn't say that, right?" The question made me stop. I sat in front of her and looked at her seriously. "No," I replied. "People who like to belittle others will always find a reason. What matters is not your clothes." She seemed to think about it. "So I don't need to change?" "You don't need to change," I said with certainty. "You need to know who you are." Alia was quiet for a moment, then gave a small smile. It was not fully bright yet, but it was enough to ease my heart. I turned off the bedroom light and sat beside her bed until she fell asleep. Her breathing became steady again. Her face looked calmer. I watched her for a long time, trying to settle my own thoughts. In the living room, I sat alone. I thought about what had happened at the party with a clearer mind. I realized that holding back my anger earlier had not been easy. Part of me wanted to respond harshly, but I chose restraint because Alia was watching. I wanted her to learn that dignity is not always shown through open confrontation. I also knew that this incident would not end that night. Alia might remember it. She might ask about it again someday. My task was not to erase the memory, but to help her understand it in a healthy way. I stood up and went to the kitchen to make a glass of warm milk. I brought it to Alia's room and placed it on the small table. She did not wake up, but I knew she would drink it when she did. Before leaving the room, I whispered softly, even though she could not hear me, "You are worthy." I closed the door gently. That night, I promised myself to be more careful in choosing the environments for my child. The world is not always kind, but as long as I am here, Alia will not face it alone. That morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The house was still quiet. Alia was still asleep in her room. I sat at the dining table with a cup of warm tea that had already begun to cool. The events at the party kept replaying in my mind. Every word Rena had said, every look from the guests, and especially Alia's face as she ran away. I took a long breath. The anger was still there, held tightly inside, but I knew I could not let it take over my thoughts. I did not regret leaving the party. Still, I realized that holding myself back in front of Alia did not mean my feelings had disappeared. I was angry, disappointed, and hurt. I had simply chosen not to release those emotions at that moment. I wanted Alia to see that I could stay in control, even in a painful situation. Alia eventually woke up and came out of her room. She walked slowly, still wearing her pajamas. Her face looked fresher, though there was a trace of tiredness in her eyes. She sat down and looked at me for a moment. "Good morning, Mom," she said. "Good morning," I replied with a small smile. I prepared a simple breakfast. We ate in a calm atmosphere. There was no talk about the party. I did not want to force her to discuss something she was not ready to talk about. At the same time, I did not want to pretend that nothing had happened. After a while, Alia put down her spoon. "Mom," she said softly, "I was thinking last night." I looked at her. "About what?" "About what Aunt said," she answered honestly. I nodded. "What did you think about it?" She looked down for a moment, then said, "I was angry. But I was also sad." I appreciated her honesty. "Those feelings are normal," I said. "Mom felt them too." Alia looked at me with hesitation. "But you weren't angry at Aunt." I let out a quiet breath. "I was angry," I said. "I just chose not to show it in the wrong way," she seemed to think. I continued, "If Mom had shouted or insulted her back, would that have made you feel better?" Alia shook her head. "No, that's why Mom held herself back," I said. "Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to protect you." She grew quiet. I could see that she was beginning to understand, even if slowly. After breakfast, Alia got ready for school. I drove her as usual. In the car, the mood felt lighter. She started talking about her lessons and her friends. I listened closely. I felt relieved seeing her spirit return, even though it was not fully restored. After dropping her off, I continued on to work. My mind, however, was not completely focused. I realized that what happened the day before could not simply be ignored, at least not within me. I needed to process my feelings so they would not turn into bitterness. During a break, I sat alone and wrote in the small notebook I always carried. I wrote down everything I felt without filtering my words. Anger, disappointment, pain, and exhaustion. When I finished, I closed the notebook. Writing it down made my chest feel a little lighter. In the afternoon, I picked Alia up. She looked more cheerful. On the way home, she asked if she could invite a friend over to play during the weekend. I agreed. I wanted this house to remain an open and warm place for her. That night, after Alia fell asleep, I reflected again. I realized that holding back anger did not mean ignoring the problem. I still needed to be firm when boundaries were crossed. But I also learned that the way I responded would become an example for Alia. I thought about Rena. All this time, I had often given in to maintain family ties. But what happened showed me that giving in without limits only made room for hurtful behavior. I began to consider setting a healthy distance. I did not intend to respond to Rena in the same way she had treated us. I also did not want Alia to grow up with hatred. But I wanted her to see that respecting oneself means having the courage to say enough, even calmly. Before going to bed, I went into Alia's room and sat beside her. She stirred slightly and looked at me. "Mom," she said sleepily, "I'm glad you held my hand yesterday." I smiled. "I will always do that." She smiled faintly and fell back asleep. I looked at her with mixed feelings. I knew that small wound might stay as a memory. But I also knew that with the right support, it would not shape her into someone fearful or insecure. That night I realized something important. Holding back anger is not a sign of weakness. For me, it was a conscious choice to protect my child. And as long as Alia grows up feeling safe and confident, every emotion I hold back today feels worth it. A few days after the party, life returned to its usual routine. I went to work in the morning, picked Alia up in the afternoon, and spent quiet evenings at home doing simple things. From the outside, everything looked normal. Yet I knew there was a small change beginning to show. Alia became quieter in certain moments. She still laughed and still talked, but she was no longer as cheerful as before when meeting new people. One afternoon, when I picked her up from school, I saw Alia standing a little apart from her group of friends. She was not alone, but she was not fully joining them either. I watched from a distance without calling her. I wanted to see how she handled herself. When she finally walked toward me, she smiled. But the smile did not last long. In the car, I asked about her day. Her answers were short. There were no complaints and no long stories. I did not push her. I knew that forcing her would only make her close herself off even more. That evening, while we were eating together, my phone buzzed. A message came in from a number I recognized. "Rena." I stared at the screen for a few seconds before opening it. The message was brief, but the tone was clear. "Don't make a big deal out of what happened the other day. People have started asking questions." I let out a slow breath. Even after everything that had happened, what she cared about was still her image and what others were saying. I did not reply right away. I put my phone away and finished dinner with Alia. After Alia went to her room, I sat alone in the living room and reread the message. There was irritation, but also clarity. I realized that Rena was not sorry. She was only worried about the social consequences of her words. That realization made me even more certain that keeping my distance was the right choice. The next day, I received a call from a distant relative. She spoke hesitantly, then asked if I was all right after what had happened at the party. Apparently, whispers had started to spread. Not everyone had closed their eyes. Some people had seen and heard what happened, even if they chose to stay silent at the time. I answered calmly that Alia and I were fine. I did not go into detail. I did not want to turn the incident into gossip. But I did not hide it either. I was not ashamed of the truth. That conversation made me realize something. Just because no one defended us at the moment did not mean everyone agreed. Some people were simply afraid to speak. Others only understood the impact after seeing the consequences. It did not erase Alia's hurt, but it reminded me that silence does not always mean approval. That afternoon, Alia asked me to help her with her schoolwork. She sat at the small table in the living room, writing with focus. I sat across from her, helping when needed. In the middle of it, she suddenly said, "Mom, my friend asked why I don't go to my cousin's parties anymore." I paused for a moment. "What did you say?" "I said I prefer staying at home," she replied. I nodded. "That's an honest answer." She looked at me. "I didn't tell them about what happened. You don't have to share it if you're not ready," I said. "That's your right." She looked relieved. I knew she was learning to choose her own boundaries. It was an important process even if it was not easy. That night, I received another message. This time it was from the family group chat. There was talk of planning another gathering. Rena's name appeared there, actively giving suggestions and comments as if nothing had happened. I read the messages without responding. I was not ready to step back into the same circle. I did not want Alia to see me pretending everything was fine just to keep the peace. I wanted her to learn that protecting oneself also matters, even within family. I was not cutting ties, but I was choosing a safe distance. Days passed. Alia slowly became more open again. She started inviting her friends over to play. I saw her laugh freely, without tension. Each time it happened, my heart felt a little calmer. One night, while we were putting away her toys together, Alia asked, "Mom, if someone says something mean, what should I do?" I stopped and looked at her. "You're allowed to feel sad or angry," I answered. "But you don't have to believe their words." "And if they keep saying it," she asked. "You can step away," I said. "And you can talk to someone you trust." She nodded. I knew the answer was simple, but it was the foundation I wanted to give her. I realized that the whispers would continue. Some people would support us, some would blame us, and others would simply watch. I could not control all of that. What I could do was make sure this home remained a safe place for Alia. For many people, the incident at the party had already passed, but for me it became a reminder. A reminder that other people's silence can be painful and that I should no longer ignore clear warning signs. I did not need public acknowledgement. I only needed to make sure my child grows up believing that she is worthy, no matter what anyone says. That day, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. There were several files I needed to finish before the midday meeting. My job required accuracy, but it rarely drew attention. I liked it that way. I was used to working behind the scenes, making sure everything ran smoothly without needing to be known by many people. As noon approached, a colleague came over and reminded me about the meeting with the foundation. I nodded. The meeting had been scheduled for a long time. I did not connect it to anything beyond work matters. To me, it was just another routine agenda. The meeting took place in a simple room. Several people sat around a long table. We discussed financial reports, aid programs, and plans for upcoming events. I listened calmly and gave input from time to time. Nothing felt unusual until one of the participants mentioned Rena's name. She was listed as one of the largest recipients of support for social activities and family events she frequently organized. Her name appeared in the context of a fund usage report. I stared at the documents in front of me longer than usual. A sense of discomfort surfaced, not because of the numbers, but because of the context. After the meeting ended, a man who had worked with me for years approached. He looked hesitant. "There's something I'd like to ask," he said quietly. I nodded, inviting him to continue. "Do you know that the funds for that family event came from the same allocation as the education assistance program?" he asked. I nodded again. "I know." He looked surprised. "And you're not bothered by that?" I looked at him. As long as the use follows the rules and does not violate any regulations, I don't interfere. He was silent for a moment, then said, "After what happened the other day, some people have started asking questions." I understood what he meant. News about the party had apparently reached a wider circle. I did not explain. I simply said that everyone is responsible for their own behavior. When I returned to my desk, my mind was no longer fully focused. I began connecting one thing to another. For a long time, I had chosen to stay quiet and work from behind the scenes. I had never considered my status or contributions as something that needed to be announced. But what happened to Alia made me see the situation from a different perspective. That afternoon, I received an unexpected call. The number was not saved, but the voice was familiar. It was one of the event coordinators who often worked with Rena. His tone was polite, even slightly nervous. "Mrs. Maya?" he asked, confirming. "Yes," I replied. "I just want to clarify something. Some people have started asking about your position regarding last week's family event." I paused. "My position as what?" I asked. "As someone who has been helping with the funding," he answered honestly. I took a breath. "I never asked for my name to be mentioned." "I know," he said quickly. "That's why we're not sure what to say." I looked out the window in front of me. Outside, the sky was beginning to change color. "Just answer according to the facts," I said. "Don't add or reduce anything." After the call ended, I sat still for a long time. For the first time, I realized that the truth I had kept quiet about might not stay hidden forever. Not because I wanted recognition, but because there were consequences that could no longer be ignored. That evening, as Alia and I ate together, I watched her more closely. She looked cheerful, talking about her day at school. There was no sign that she knew what was on my mind. I did not want to burden her with adult concerns. But after dinner, while we were clearing the table, Alia suddenly asked, "Mom, why do people like to show off?" The question caught me off guard. I looked at her. "Why do you ask?" "I see it at school. Some people like to make others feel small," she said. I nodded slowly. "Sometimes people show off because they want to look better. Sometimes because they forget how to be kind." She thought for a moment. "Then why don't you ever talk about your work, Mom?" I smiled faintly. "Because for Mom, what matters is that the work is useful, not the story behind it." She accepted the answer without further questions. I felt relieved, but I also knew that one day she would understand more. That night, after Alia fell asleep, I reopened old files on my laptop. Records of contributions, fund usage reports, and partnership letters. Everything was organized and clear. There was nothing wrong in terms of rules. But morally, I began asking myself whether staying silent was still the best choice. I did not want to respond to Rena's behavior with showing off or trying to prove anything. I also did not want Alia to grow up believing that a person's worth is measured by financial power. Yet I also did not want injustice to continue simply because I chose to remain quiet. I closed the laptop and turned off the living room light. The decision was not fully formed, but the seed was already there. An unexpected truth was slowly rising to the surface. Not to bring anyone down, but to restore the boundaries that should have existed all along. I knew that when the time came, I would have to speak, not with anger, not with revenge, just with clarity, for myself and for Alia. A few days after that meeting, I received a formal invitation to attend a follow-up discussion with the foundation and several event partners. The meeting was scheduled at the same venue as the previous party. I hesitated for a moment about going. However, after thinking it through calmly, I decided to attend. Not to seek attention, but to take care of matters that were truly my responsibility. I did not explain the details to Alia. I only told her that I had to attend an important meeting. She nodded and went back to her activities. I was grateful she did not ask further questions. I wanted to protect her from tension she did not need to understand yet. When I arrived at the location, the atmosphere was very different from the party. There was no loud music or excessive laughter. The room was arranged simply with chairs and a meeting table. Several people were already there. They greeted me politely. Some of them looked surprised to see my name listed as a main participant. I took my seat and opened the folder I had brought. I focused on the documents in front of me. I did not look around for anyone in particular. Still, I knew Rena was in the room. Her presence was noticeable even before I saw her. A few minutes later, she entered with an event coordinator. Her steps slowed when she saw me. Her eyes widened briefly before she tried to smile. The smile did not last. She looked confused, then uneasy. She took a seat across from me without greeting me. The meeting began with a review of reports. Names and contributions were mentioned one by one. When my name was stated as the main donor and final decision maker, the room grew noticeably quieter. Several people turned to look at me. I remained calm and did not change my expression. I saw Rena straighten her back. Her hands gripped the edge of the table. Her face turned pale. She glanced at the event coordinator, then looked back at me. Her gaze was no longer dismissive. There was shock she could not hide. The coordinator explained openly that I had chosen not to present a public identity all this time. All activities had been carried out based on trust and professional agreements. There had been no intention to hide anything, only a personal choice. Rena finally raised her hand. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. She asked why this had never been explained to her before. Her tone sounded defensive. I turned toward her and answered calmly. Because it was not relevant to our family relationship, I said. And because I did not feel the need to explain it. The room fell silent again. No one interrupted. I continued in the same tone. I did not mention the party or the hurtful words spoken there. I only emphasized that every activity using foundation support must reflect the values we uphold together. Rena lowered her head. Her shoulders dropped slightly. She did not say anything else. For the first time, I saw her without the confidence she usually displayed. No jewelry or expensive clothing could hide her unpreparedness. The meeting continued until it ended. Decisions were made clearly. There was no drama and no open confrontation. Everything remained professional. Still, the shift in atmosphere was undeniable. As people began to leave the room, Rena stood and walked toward me. Her steps were hesitant. She stopped a few steps in front of me. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" she asked softly. I looked at her. "Because I did not want my life to become a comparison," I replied. "I want my child to grow up without feeling the need to compete." She fell silent. Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. "I didn't know," she said briefly. "I know," I replied. "And I also know what you said at the party." Rena lowered her head further. There was no defense and no excuse. Only an honest silence. I did not wait for an apology. I did not need one to feel whole. I only wanted clear boundaries. I took my bag and walked out of the room without rushing. Outside, I took a deep breath. I felt relieved, not because the truth had been revealed, but because I was no longer hiding. I did not raise my voice. I did not belittle anyone. I simply stood where I was supposed to stand. On the way home, I thought about Alia. I imagined her small smile in the morning. I knew she did not need to know the details of this meeting. What mattered was that she knew her mother chose a calm and firm path. That night, as we ate together, Alia asked whether my work had gone well. I nodded and said everything was fine. She smiled and continued eating. There was no burden on her face. I realized one thing. Truth does not always need to be spoken loudly. Sometimes it is enough to be present and honest. A pale face is not the goal. What matters is the lesson that remains. And that night, I slept with a lighter heart. Not because I had won, but because I was no longer avoiding anything. A few days after that meeting, Rena contacted me. Her message was brief and to the point. She wanted to meet and talk. I did not reply right away. I read the message several times, then put my phone away. I wanted to be sure that my decision would not be driven by momentary emotion. I thought about Alia. I thought about what I wanted to show her. If I met Raina, it would not be to reopen old wounds or seek justification. It had to be a clear, calm conversation with a purpose. After careful consideration, I agreed to meet at a neutral place, a small cafe that was not too crowded. I arrived first and chose a quiet corner. I did not order anything except a glass of water. I did not want the atmosphere softened by small comforts. A few minutes later, Rena arrived. She looked simpler than usual. There was no flashy jewelry. She appeared neat, but not excessive. She sat across from me without much small talk. "Thank you for coming," she said. I nodded. "Let's just talk," I replied. Rena took a deep breath. She lowered her gaze for a moment before looking back at me. "I was wrong," she finally said. Her voice was flat, without drama. "I should not have spoken like that in front of your child." I listened without interrupting. I waited for her to continue. "I did not think about the impact," she went on. "I am used to speaking without filtering my words. I thought it was a joke." I nodded slightly. "A joke should not hurt," I said calmly. "Especially a child." Rena nodded. Her face was tense. "I know that now." I looked at her directly. "What matters most is not your apology to me," I said. "What matters is how Alia felt." Rena fell silent. She rubbed her hands together, clearly uneasy. "I don't know what to do," she said. "You don't need to explain at length," I replied. "You need to change." I did not say it as a threat. I stated it as a fact. Rena nodded slowly. She seemed to accept it, even though it was not easy. I continued, "I did not come here to talk about status, money, or any role. I do not want Alia to learn that a person's value is defined by those things." Rena looked at me. "I don't want children to learn the wrong things either," she said. "Then," I said, "we agree." We sat in silence for a moment. There was nothing left to prove. I did not feel the need to explain my position further. Everything had been clear since that meeting. Before we parted, I said one more thing. "I am not forbidding you from seeing Alia, but I will always keep boundaries. If the same words happen again, I will not stay silent." Rena nodded. "I understand." We parted without a hug. There was no excessive warmth, but there was clarity that had never existed before. When I got home, Alia was doing her homework in the living room. She looked up and smiled when she saw me. The smile felt light. I sat beside her and asked about her activities. She answered enthusiastically. A little later, she asked, "Mom, where did you go earlier?" "To meet someone," I answered briefly. She did not ask again. She returned her focus to her book. I watched the way she sat, the way she thought, the way she wrote. I realized that my attitude today would become part of her life lessons even if she was not fully aware of it yet. That night, as we prepared for bed, Alia said, "Mom, if someone says something unkind, I'm allowed to say I don't like it, right?" I smiled. "Yes," I replied. "You have the right to protect your feelings." She nodded. "I'll try." I turned off the light and sat beside her bed for a while until she fell asleep. In the living room, I reflected. Meeting Rena did not erase the past, but it gave direction for the future. I realized that the most appropriate response was not to embarrass someone or retaliate in the same way. The best response was to be firm without losing control. I did not need recognition or excessive regret. I only needed real change in behavior. I also understood that forgiveness does not always mean returning to how things were. Sometimes forgiveness means moving forward with healthier boundaries. That did not make me a harsh person. It made me responsible. That night, I went to sleep with a clearer mind. I knew not everyone would understand my choices. But I was certain of one thing. Alia would grow up with a clear example. She would learn that self-respect does not need to be defended with shouting, but with consistent actions. And for me, that was the most elegant answer. Time moved slowly after everything that had happened. From the outside, there were no major changes, but I felt them inside our home. The atmosphere became calmer. I no longer carried the burden I had been holding on my own. Alia also seemed freer to express herself without the quiet anxiety that was hard to explain. A few weeks later, our mother hosted a small family gathering. I hesitated about going, but she assured me the atmosphere would be different. I talked briefly with Alia and asked if she wanted to come. She thought for a moment, then nodded. She said she wanted to try. We arrived wearing our usual simple clothes. I did not want to change who we were just to be accepted. When we entered our mother's house, several family members greeted us warmly. There were no strange looks, no whispers. I saw Reina in the corner of the room. She looked at us, then walked over. She stopped in front of Alia and crouched down to her level. Alia, she said softly. I'm sorry about what I said before. Alia glanced at me. I gave her a small nod, signaling that she was safe. Alia looked back at Reina and said simply, I didn't like it back then, but now it's okay. The answer was simple, honest, and enough. Reina gave a faint smile and stood up. She looked at me and silently mouthed thank you. I returned it with a nod. There was nothing more to say. The gathering went smoothly. Alia played with her cousins. I talked with our mother in the kitchen. She looked at me with gentle eyes. You seem calmer, she said. I'm learning not to carry everything alone, I replied. She smiled and patted my hand. There were no further questions. She understood my way. When we drove home that afternoon, Alia looked tired but happy. In the car, she said, Mom, it turns out that being brave enough to come again wasn't as scary as I imagined. I smiled. Being brave doesn't mean not being afraid, I said. It means coming even when you're still afraid. She nodded slowly, thinking about my words. The days that followed felt normal. I returned my focus to work. I still chose to work without the spotlight. But now I was no longer hiding. If I needed to speak, I spoke. If I needed to stay quiet, I did so consciously, not out of fear. One day, Alia came home from school with a bright expression. She told me that a friend had mocked her simple bag. She said she didn't get angry. She just said the bag was comfortable and that she liked it. Her friend fell silent and did not continue teasing her. I listened with pride. Not because she defended herself loudly, but because she did not feel inferior. That night, before bed, Alia asked, Mom, will everyone always understand? I shook my head. No, and that's okay. Why? She asked. Because we don't live to satisfy every judgment, I answered. We live to be ourselves, with good values. She smiled and hugged me. The hug was simple, but full of meaning. Sometime later, I received the Foundation's annual report. The support programs were growing well. Many children were being helped. I read the report with a quiet sense of satisfaction. I knew this was my place, giving without needing to be seen, acting without needing to be announced. I also realized that the painful incident had taught us lessons we would not have learned any other way. Alia learned about self-worth. I learned about boundaries. Reina learned about the impact of words. No one truly lost, as long as they were willing to learn. I did not close the door on family. I simply set healthier boundaries. I did not change myself to be accepted. I just became a more honest version of myself. One afternoon, as Alia and I walked home from the park, she said, Mom, I'm happy with how things are now. How is that? I asked. Calm, she replied. We don't have to prove anything. I smiled. It was a conclusion not every adult could reach. At home, I prepared a simple dinner. We ate while sharing stories. There were no raised voices, no pressure. I realized that happiness often does not come from other people's approval, but from wholeness within one's own home. When I turned off the lights that night, I felt complete. Not because the past had been erased, but because I chose the right way forward. I chose dignity without harming others. I chose compassion without sacrificing boundaries. Most importantly, I showed my child that her worth is never defined by clothes, status, or other people's words. Her value lies in her attitude, her courage, and a heart that stays true. That was the ending I chose. Calm, clear, and enough.